From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Early voting officially begins as Alabama mails the first batch of absentee ballots today, with Pennsylvania set to follow Monday. This as the candidates return to the campaign trail following this week's debate. We'll talk about the issues driving the race and the debate over government funding here in Washington with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. The Biden administration talks AI, hosting NVIDIA's Jensen Huang and Sam Altman of OpenAI today to talk energy and infrastructure. We'll have a report ahead from the White House. Republicans split on whether to allow Ukraine to use U.S.-provided weapons offensively against Russia. We'll get the view from Evelyn Farkas at the McCain Institute. All that ahead this hour. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Kaylee Lyons is off. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump back on the campaign trail today. The post-debate roadshow begins. North Carolina and Arizona, respectively, with Trump saying there will be no more debates, while Harris calls for more.
2 nights ago, Donald Trump and I had our first debate. And I believe we owe it to the voters to have another debate.
Joining us now, Bloomberg's Michael Shepard with his eye on the campaign trail. Michael, it's great to see you at the table here. She's clearly feeling pretty good about the way things went Tuesday night and, of course, trying to goad Donald Trump into another. It does appear, though, based on what we heard from today and read specifically from Donald Trump on Truth Social, that's all we're going to get.
And he made it pretty clear in all caps that there would not be a third debate. It was something that his campaign reiterated, in case you didn't get the message. He had flirted yesterday with the idea of maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, maybe on Fox, which the Harris campaign had ruled out already, maybe on NBC. But thinking about it from a strategy standpoint, the risk outweighs the reward for Trump in doing a rematch with Kamala Harris. The first debate that he had with Joe Biden was actually not that great for Trump anyway. It was papered over by Biden's epically poor performance, the one that ultimately caused him to drop from the race. But Trump on Tuesday night really showed that he was not prepared to go toe-to-toe with the former prosecutor.
Well, that's saying a lot for somebody who's done more of these presidential general election debates than literally anyone. And it looks like this is all that we're going to get here. So early voting begins. As I mentioned, North Carolina was supposed to be already at it before the debate. Their absentee ballots were delayed because of a lawsuit by RFK Jr. trying to get himself off the ballot. So Alabama moves up to number 1, and Pennsylvania is on Monday. This has become a critical part of the campaign strategy.
Well, Joe, we are now in election mode, and this is the final sprint for the candidates. And it is urgent for them to get their message out there very clearly and as widely as possible. And in a way, Trump deciding not to do a third debate deprives Kamala Harris of one more opportunity to introduce herself to voters and to clarify any policy questions about her that they might have. But it also robs him of a chance to speak to a broader audience than the very loyal one that he addresses in smaller form at his rallies. Yeah. So it really does come down to now getting that message out and going state to state as they're doing.
Michael Shepard, important moment today at the White House. It falls right in line with your area of expertise here as we see Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, Sam Altman from OpenAI at the White House talking with administration officials about what they need. That starts with infrastructure and power. What role does the administration play in this critical point of the evolution of AI?
Well, industrial policy has been a centerpiece of President Joe Biden's agenda since he took office. We saw the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act signed and enacted in 2022, and each was geared to promote semiconductor manufacturing, and that is geared toward artificial intelligence, which is the vanguard of the new tech wave that we're seeing right in our face. We saw OpenAI introduce its new Strawberry model today. This is, the cutting edge of tech. NVIDIA is benefiting enormously from the AI revolution, shifting its production from gaming chips and processors to equipment geared for AI. Now, the energy component comes in because none of this works unless you have data centers, and they have to be really big, and they have to be able to do many functions to test those language models, and that requires a lot of energy. And to make any of the administration's plans for, boosting domestic manufacturing and making America, keeping America's place as a tech leader globally, it will depend on all of that infrastructure for energy for this.
I wonder to what extent Democrats and Republicans will start warming up to the idea of nuclear power as these demands grow at data centers. Michael, thank you, as always, for the insights. Bloomberg's Michael Shepard with us in Washington. As we turn to the economy today, another big day today with the PPI out, Producer Price Index, in this morning, mostly in line with expectations. The core at 2.4% year over year. Overall, 1.7%. Data appearing to firm up 25 basis points for an interest rate cut at the Fed's meeting next week. No one knows more than Bloomberg's Kate Davidson, who runs our Fed coverage here in Washington. Kate, thanks for being with us. This essentially reinforces what we thought on CPI Day yesterday.
Yeah, basically, Joe, I mean, it's good news for the Fed. This is just broadly, things are going in the direction that the Fed wants to see. But I think as we've talked about, their eye really now is on the labor market. And I think that is really what's going to drive the size and the pace of the rate cuts going forward. So the data today showed prices, continuing to cool. They picked up just only slightly. But the categories that feed into the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, which is the personal consumption expenditures price index, those were positive. So just kind of keeps them on track for that quarter point cut. And whether they decide down the line or, maybe even next week, and they haven't had the meeting yet. Maybe if they do weigh whether to go for a bigger cut next week or in the coming months, it's going to depend on how worried they are about the labor market. And they're not going to get any more data about that before their meeting that starts on Tuesday. Interesting.
The market sees 25 then, and I guess we'll talk about this again next week. In the meantime, though, some worries about the job market slowing down more than some might have seen toward the end of this year. We saw jobless claims up a little more than expected today. So just a few weeks ago, Jay Powell described the job market as being in balance. How long does that last before you worry?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's kind of at the heart of this economic debate is you're at this point where the jobless rate is starting to tick up. And historically what happens is once that starts, it can go quite quickly. And you just don't know how quickly it's going to happen. But then again, we are in this post-pandemic period where the economy is so different in so many ways. It's really defied expectations for the last few years. So that is what Fed officials are wrestling with. Is it's going to look like kind of a traditional economic cycle? If you look at what's happening with growth, and other sectors of the economy, this is what Fed officials are saying is there's not really any alarm bells going off. Yes, the labor market is cooling, maybe a little more than they expected, like you said, but there aren't a lot of other signs that are overly worrisome, which is, again, why they're going to go for that smaller cut, I think we expect next week.
Will Jay Powell, though, chart a course when he talks to reporters next week for cuts through the end of the year, or do we stay data dependent and go meeting by meeting?
Well, we have the benefit of getting their updated forecasts. Fed officials, every, 4 times a year they release their summary of economic projections. That's not a committee exercise. They don't all agree on it. They each, as individuals, will say, here's what I think is going to happen. So, we tend to think of it as them penciling in, and Jay Powell will repeatedly remind us on Wednesday, hey, this is not a plan. This isn't us promising what we're going to do, but everyone's going to look at what those forecasts say and going to make assumptions about, okay, this is what they're ready to do. But I think when it comes down to it, what actually happens at the meetings, he will say, is a data-dependent decision. I'm sure he will stick to that.
Getting used to that phrase. Kate Davidson, thank you so much. Reporting on the Fed for Bloomberg. Thank you, Kate. Coming up, Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is going to join us from Texas. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. The Congressional Black Caucus is holding its annual legislative conference in Washington this week, just a couple blocks away from where I'm sitting, carving out priorities for the year ahead. And joining me right now to talk about this and a lot more is Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. It's great to see you, Congresswoman. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm looking forward to putting a fine point on the priorities that you're discussing today at the CBC. It's something we've been talking about today on Bloomberg, but I have to get your reaction first to this news that apparently there will not be another presidential debate. I'm sure you watched Kamala Harris and Donald Trump on Tuesday. This has been on again, off again. He says it's not going to happen. What are you laughing at?
I'm sorry. I did not know that that's where you were going with this. Listen, even a blind man could see that it was a man down situation the other day during the debate. You know, one of the phrases that we use as a colloquialism is that we snatch wigs. Well, I'm just telling you, he got his toupee snatched. And so regardless of what type of spinning he's going to try to do, it is clear that he knows that this is a woman that he literally just cannot measure up to. And so absolutely, he doesn't want to go another round because if he didn't think he was knocked down before, he would absolutely recognize it if he went for another round with her.
Well, he says the hair is real, Congresswoman. I don't know anything about it, but I do know that we hear from his supporters who say, and this isn't the comedy part of the show, but we do hear his supporters remind us that when Donald Trump was in the White House, no new wars, and it was a time, they say, of American prosperity. They felt more enriched, wages were rising, depending, of course, on who you talk to. How do you answer those claims?
Yeah, so here are the realities. You know, if I could go back and get rid of COVID-19, I absolutely would. But the reality is that we struggled with COVID-19. And to be perfectly honest, a lot of the harm and the hurt that we're still feeling is because of his mismanagement of COVID-19. And I know that some people would say, oh, no, but COVID is gone. And was it really that bad? Yeah, it was really that bad. I want to remind the American people that we had freezer trucks full of dead bodies, and we did not know if we were going to live to see tomorrow. And this wasn't a disease that just affected those that were seniors. It affected everyone. Everyone has lost someone that they love because of COVID-19. But the reality is that we would not have the mismanagement that we had if we didn't have a commander-in-chief that told us to inject bleach into our bodies, but instead got down to the business of making sure that we could start to save lives. So I want to remind people that that was part of the problem. Here is the reality. As someone who has a business background, I can tell you that our supply chains are still struggling right now. When we ended up not being able to buy cars because cars were so much more expensive, that's because we literally have chips in everything that we use, whether it's our computers, our cell phones, our watches, our cars. Everything takes chips. That is why the Democrats, when they got control of the House, the Senate, as well as the presidency, they passed the Chips and Science Act because they recognized that we needed to make sure that we could bring some of that manufacturing right back here to the United States. We have seen an unprecedented amount of manufacturing jobs that have arisen in the United States because of the direct actions of this particular administration and the House Democrats and the Senate Democrats. And just to kind of put a final point on that particular thing, in Ohio specifically, they now have a new $26 billion facility that has come to rural America, Ohio. When these people set foot in the White House, they decided that they would be a president and a vice president for the entire United States. And that's what we have to look at. Are we going to have someone that is going to continually be divisive and say, well, we are going to do things for red states and ignore the blue states and not put in the work? We need a commander-in-chief for all of the United States, one that will recognize the pain that we are all feeling. And so I can tell you that this vice president, who will soon become the president of the United States, understands that there's still more work to be done. But let me tell you, it would have been a lot worse if we continued down the trajectory that Donald Trump had us going down.
Okay, so let's move this forward from a legislative perspective, Congresswoman, because that's what you're talking about today at the conference. And of course, that's your job. We've heard proposals from Donald Trump with regard to tariffs, with regard to mass deportation, a lot of different things that it appears he'll be able to do. And he's the first to say this pretty much on his own through executive action. Much of what we have heard from Kamala Harris, the candidate you're supporting, like price gouging bill, for instance, some of the housing initiatives, tax policy she's talking about, will require the approval of Congress. So if Democrats take the House back, you're drawing up plans right now at the convention center. What do you do on day one? What is your priority at the CBC?
Well, for me on day one is voting rights. That is my priority all around, because if we can stop some of the gerrymandering, because we have lost the Voting Rights Act in so many ways. We only have, Section 2, and it's hanging by a thread right now. And when we're talking about making sure that in states like Texas, we have representation that is actually reflective of the will of the people, we can solve so many problems, whether it's around reproductive access or whether it's around climate change or whether it's around guns. Everything goes down to whether or not we can actually access the ballot box and decide that we are going to choose our leaders instead of our leaders choosing their constituents. And so for me, everything boils down to voting rights. In addition to that, listen, again, I said that I'm in Texas and I'm a woman. So knowing that my state legislature is trying to introduce the death penalty when they go back in January, I feel like I've got to do my part, because if Texas introduces the death penalty, then let me tell you, Florida gonna come behind them, Georgia gonna come behind them, and any other crazy radical legislature that we have. And so I believe in saving lives that are already here. And so that's what I'm going to do, in addition to making sure we can focus in on the guns and the gun violence that we see. Because, we just saw what happened in Georgia. That is a travesty that in America, little kids don't know whether or not they will return home, as if they have gone into a war zone, but instead they are going into a schoolhouse. But right now, today, I just learned that we just had another shooting in downtown Dallas. I am tired of this. This is no way to live. And so I think that it's another thing that we've got to get on top of.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that news, Congresswoman. In the time that we have, taking over the House is not a foregone conclusion. What do Democrats need to do between now and November? And I note the fact that early voting is beginning as we speak in Alabama, and it will be Monday in Pennsylvania. How do you close the deal?
Yeah, listen, this is about doing the work. One thing that you see out of Democrats, whether you're looking at the Democrats that are currently serving in the House, which I've been traveling the country fighting for Democrats up and down the ballot, we know that on Labor Day, there was only one team that actually labored on Labor Day, and it was the Democratic team. Let me tell you, that's the top of the ticket. If they were working, just know the rest of us are working. So I'm talking to candidates all around the country. I'm trying to figure out what it is that they're doing, trying to give them tips on what else it can be that they should do. I'm trying to make sure the donors are being introduced to them. I'm sending them money myself. We are going to work to earn every single vote that we get on November 5th, whether we're talking about to make sure we take the House back, or if it means that we're talking about winning the White House. And the final point that I'll make on this is that it's important that House Democrats remind the American people of the dysfunction that we've seen, the historic dysfunction that we've seen under the control of House Republicans, from kicking out a speaker for the first time in the history of the United States to potentially kicking out a second speaker all in one term, to not being able to elect a speaker, making us vulnerable by not having a House that had actually been formed. This is dangerous to all the times that even as of now, we are supposed to be making sure that we can pass a budget and keep the lights on in the U.S. government. But right now, there is no plan. The Speaker of the House laid out a stopgap measure that he can't even get the votes for out of his own caucus. You need the Democrats to run the House, the Senate, and the White House.
We've got 19 days before the government runs out of money. Congresswoman, we're out of time. Is the government going to shut down?
I don't know.
Stay in touch with us. We're glad you're back. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas joining us from the CBC Legislative Conference. Thank you so much. Coming up, the titans of AI meet with White House officials today to talk infrastructure needs. And we'll have details on that meeting next. Live from the North Lawn, Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining. Executives from some of the most important artificial intelligence companies visited the White House today, where we find Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall for more on their visit. Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Joe. A White House official confirms to Bloomberg News that a range of technology executives from top AI companies like OpenAI and NVIDIA attended a White House meeting today with some senior cabinet level officials such as Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, since this has so much to do with chip manufacturing and energy consumption. As the industry expands, you actually had the chance to speak with the CEO of the Congressional Black Caucus earlier today on Balance of Power and asked her how leaders in Washington are thinking about AI.
We know that AI is seen in every aspect and every crucial system of our country, whether we're talking about our monetary system, whether we're talking about our voting system, whether we're talking about how we do our work each and every day. So it's incumbent upon us as the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and the members of the CBC that are leaders here in the country to talk about those issues.
Today's White House visit also included executives from Google and Microsoft. According to people familiar, the main focus was to discuss the massive infrastructure and energy needs that go along with an expansion of data centers and chip manufacturing as AI becomes more prevalent. In a statement to Bloomberg News, Google's president said it was important to, quote, advance the work required to modernize and expand the capacity of America's energy grid. A recent Goldman Sachs analysis shows that globally data center power consumption is on the rise. It's largely fueled by what they called the AI revolution. It's expected to grow 160% by 2030. The industry says the U.S. needs to be ready to scale and compete today. Part of that competition involves China, something that we know that the White House is trying to prioritize. For example, keeping NVIDIA's most advanced chip technology off limits. And Joe, as you know, also trying to bring back the complete chip supply chain, including manufacturing, back home.
Yes, right. Yeah. Wow. To be a fly on the wall in that meeting today, Tyler, you don't have to look far to bump into the AI story when it comes to politics. Probably the most high profile incident was just this week, as we learned after the debate, Tyler.
Right. Well, you're alluding to when Taylor Swift offered her endorsement to Kamala Harris's campaign shortly after the debate concluded. And in her Instagram post announcing her endorsement, she actually cited AI, kind of using it as almost a public service announcement on artificial intelligence. She cited this AI-generated image of her supporting Trump's campaign, saying that that was not true. And of course, it's not the only instance that Taylor Swift has fallen victim to deepfakes and AI online, saying that it's something she's paying attention to.
Yeah, something tells me we might bump into that again before November. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live at the White House. Tyler, thank you so much. Coming up, we'll look at what's next for the war in Ukraine. Evelyn Farkas from the McCain Institute is with us next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
Look, this is a war. And Russia is using everything they have to be able to go after Ukraine. And I think it's our responsibility and the responsibility of our allies to be able to make sure that Ukraine is fully armed, has all of the weapons that are necessary in order to fully defend themselves in this war.
It's Leon Panetta, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, talking with me on the early edition of Balance of Power, discussing the responsibility of the U.S., in his opinion, to help defend Ukraine. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for being with us as we add the voice of Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director of the McCain Institute, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Russia and Ukraine. Evelyn, it's great to see you. There is a great debate going on right now in Washington that is pitting some Republicans on Capitol Hill against Donald Trump and whether to remove restrictions on Ukraine using U.S.-provided weapons against Russia. Bloomberg reporting that we could get a decision following UNGA, but we might hear from President Biden on this earlier. Does this simply come down to a ruling or a decision by the administration, or does it require Congress to be involved as well?
Well, Joe, thanks again for having me on. And I actually worked under Secretary Panetta at the Department of Defense, so it's great to see him on your show. Look, the administration absolutely can make this decision, and the executive branch is providing the assistance to Ukraine. They are setting the rules of the road. Congress certainly could intervene and try to change the rules somehow, but we know that the bipartisan support for Ukraine includes letting them, win the war any way that they can within the bounds of international law. So I don't think that waiting for Congress would help anyone, and certainly not the Ukrainians. I will say, though, that removing these restrictions doesn't mean that Ukraine's going to win overnight. I mean, there are a lot of other things that will go into a victory or even a victory at the peace, negotiating table.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because some military analysts have been quick to warn that this really might not make much difference at all, particularly without getting additional long-range weapon systems to use against Russia. I wonder, though, Evelyn, to the extent that you can put your strategy hat on here, air raid sirens go off in Kyiv every time MiG-31s take off in Russia, armed to attack civilian targets in Ukraine. Would it be enough to simply be able to target them?
Well, I think anything that Ukraine could do to create stronger air defenses to protect their civilians certainly is something that they will look to do. So they'll take out any of the Russian offensive weaponry that they can and take out the air bases. The problem is that the Russians already positioned a lot of their artillery, a lot of their equipment, a lot of the aircraft that are used to send the glide bombs in, which are a real problem for the Ukrainians, farther out of reach of some of the long-range munitions. So that is an issue. We are providing Patriot batteries to the Ukrainians. We just need to get them in there faster. So that's also important, just air defense, period. And of course, the front line, I think, is what the Ukrainians are really worried about, because the Iranians are now providing ballistic missiles to Russia. This has been confirmed now by our government and the British government. And those munitions will be used likely to attack if not the front line, certainly civilians. And that's what now has gotten the attention of the international community. And I think that's why they're going to reverse this decision to not let the Ukrainians use long-range artillery into Russia.
Fascinating. Yeah, well, this would be a major development here. And of course, the war in Ukraine was a topic of conversation during this week's presidential debate. I'm sure you saw it, Evelyn. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris shared this exchange over the Russia-Ukraine war.
I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. And what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened.
And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
I don't know who's eating who for lunch here, Evelyn, but I just wonder, after being given the opportunity twice to say that he wanted Ukraine to win the war, Donald Trump would simply say he wanted it to end. What would a Trump administration mean for this effort?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not saying that you want Ukraine to win, then you're saying you're okay with Russia winning. And Russia winning is a very dangerous world, because we know Vladimir Putin, he's not going to stop with Ukraine. He's going to take Moldova and Georgia because those are part of the former Soviet Union. He's very neo-imperial. He wants to recreate this Russian empire. And he will probably try to attack NATO somehow, directly or indirectly, to weaken us. We don't want war with Russia. The best thing that we can do is support Ukraine to defeat this aggressive Russian foreign policy. President Trump refuses to even engage in that kind of conversation because he has this weird, desire to not offend Vladimir Putin, and this idea that he can somehow talk both of these presidents into doing something that's not in their interest. That's not how it works. You have to exert pressure on the parties. And frankly, in this case, it's Russia that started the aggressive war. We need to convince the Russian government that it's no longer in their interest to fight and that they have to negotiate. We're not there yet.
Well, contrasts are important right now to a lot of Americans, Evelyn, as they try to make decisions. Absentee ballots are going out starting today and will be in Pennsylvania on Monday. During the debate, Israel also came up as we try to understand the different approaches between a Harris administration and a Trump administration. Here's what they had to say about support for Israel and the war in Gaza.
She hates Israel. if she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one.
But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution.
Evelyn, voters might be more familiar, Washington certainly is, with Donald Trump's approach to Israel, his relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu, but there have been questions about the way Kamala Harris would approach this. She chose her words very carefully the other night. I suspect you don't see the extinction of Israel within 2 years, as Donald Trump said. Maybe you do, but what would be, if any, difference between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden when it comes to this?
Yeah, well, first of all, if I could just say a thing about Donald Trump, because I went to Israel in June. I had not been there since 2017. It was still early in Trump's time. And what I learned there was that Trump gave the far right in Israel a free hand. We didn't actually support what had been long time U.S. policy to support a two-state solution, to not support, to oppose actually new settlements in the territories that are supposed to go ultimately to the Palestinians as part of a resolution. So I believe actually that Israel is in the greatest danger right now of a civil war, including in the West Bank, because of Donald Trump's policies and, of course, President Netanyahu's policies, which were facilitated by our government. So I think that it needs to be really clear that I think we're in greater danger, at least from the perspective of Israeli sovereignty, if Donald Trump were to get into office. Now, between Biden and Vice President Harris, I think Vice President Harris has spoken more clearly about the need for a two-state solution, that the ceasefire is important in and of itself, I think, is what she's signaling. But she's also saying, I believe that the Palestinians deserve their own sovereign state. The problem is that the Israeli government has these right-wing members, and probably I don't know whether the prime minister agrees with them or not, but Prime Minister Netanyahu is not moving in the direction of a two-state solution. And so they're treating the ceasefire as if they can't agree to it, which this is what we need to release the hostages. So I think Kamala Harris understands that there's a humanitarian crisis that the Palestinian people are experiencing. She's not excusing the terrorists or Hamas or Iran, but she's taking a firmer approach and looking with an eye towards the future.
Will both wars still be underway on the day of the inauguration?
Well, certainly Ukraine is not going to end, by January. And I hope to God that there's a ceasefire earlier than that in Israel, because the hostages need it, lives depend on it. There will still be conflict in Israel and in the Middle East. That's a reality. It takes time to create the conditions for diplomacy.
It's good to see you, Evelyn. Thanks for coming back. Evelyn Farkas is, of course, executive director of the McCain Institute and a familiar voice here on Balance of Power. Thank you. Coming up, Congress races to avoid a government shutdown. We're now 19 days out, and our political panel is here next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We are simply asking traditional Republicans to partner with House Democrats in a bipartisan way to find the common ground necessary to avoid a Donald Trump-inspired extreme MAGA Republican shutdown. That's not too much to ask.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries earlier today, even though we could have probably played that tape a couple times from earlier in the year, addressing, yes, once again, the potential for a government shutdown. The funding deadline is 19 days away. And with us now, our political panel for their take. Kristen Hahn from Rock Solutions is here, Democratic strategist, alongside Lester Munson, BGR Group's co-head of international practice, Republican strategist. Great to see you both here at the table. Lester, what's your thought on this? Did Donald Trump actually create a stir here? He put up a Truth Social telling Republicans don't vote for any extension unless it has the SAVE Act, which is something that Democrats are not going to vote for. Are Republicans afraid to do anything different? Could this lead to a shutdown, or is this just another dust-up from Donald Trump we won't even remember next week?
I think it's a dust-up. I think this is messaging. This is him showing he can still pull some strings in Congress in part. I think they'll probably have a vote on something that has the SAVE Act in it, and then they'll shift pretty quickly to doing the thing that they need to do to actually keep the government
open. So Chuck Schumer waiting in the wings in the Senate with a stopgap that will then jam the House. As I said, we can replay the tape several times already.
I wouldn't rule out Mike Johnson having his own stopgap in his back pocket and ready to roll it out when he needs to. He knows what he's got to do to stay in his position and kind of keep all the, the wild animals at bay for a little bit longer. He's going to have this vote first, perhaps, on the CR that won't go anywhere. Then he can vote for the one that will go somewhere.
With a very thin majority on the line, of course, in November. Now, Kristen, it is your job as the Democrat, right, to tell me that Donald Trump is the Speaker of the House.
He is. I mean, and the funny thing is, we all know what's going to happen. Given the makeup of the Senate and Biden said he's going to veto. Is it as simple as that? It is. At the end of the day, yes, we're going to replay the tape. There's going to be a short-term CR. I don't know exactly how long. That's how this all ends. However, I get what you're saying. The show vote's going to have to happen. However, you've got this element of Trump. He called Mike Johnson and said, "Don't pass this bipartisan border security bill." And he did it. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the case here because you've got these Republicans who are in these tough districts who are looking at the speaker going, we don't need a government shutdown right now. So he can't listen to Donald Trump on this one, but Trump, certainly isn't making it easy for them.
I want to ask you both about January 6th, not 2020, but 2025. Interesting development today as we heard from the Department of Homeland Security. It's been deemed a national special security event, suggesting that it's not going to be a game day call to bring in the National Guard. The Secret Service is going to be in charge. This, of course, came up during the debate January 6th. Donald Trump had this to say about the events on that day.
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big.
The President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured.
Fast forward 4 years, and the Secret Service will be overseeing the security plan, we have learned. What does that mean for our place in American politics now, and will that ensure we don't relive this experience?
Well, let's be clear. This is really all on Donald Trump. He was the one who incited the people to do what they did 4 years ago at the Capitol. It was a tragedy. It was an atrocity. It was one of the worst things that's happened in our recent history, in my view. On the other hand, I think every announcement that's coming out of this administration for the next 2 months is going to be purely for the benefit of the election. And I think this announcement, such as it is, was made to remind voters of the events of January 6, 2021, and kind of keep that ball in the air politically. Now, it's Donald Trump's responsibility that happened, but the administration, I think, is making these announcements because they want to have that as part of the discussion.
How about that? What do you make of that, Kristen? Is that what drove Homeland?
I'm not quite that cynical. I don't think so. I live on Capitol Hill. I was a few blocks away. I had friends calling me from inside the Capitol saying, is there any way you can come get us if we can make it out of here? I think, putting the onus all on the Capitol Police just isn't fair to them, and they don't have the manpower to take on something like that. So I'm a little less cynical here. I think that we need everybody working together to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again.
Yeah. And of course there was a legislative tweak limiting the role that the vice president plays, or at least clarifying the role in certifying the votes to make sure that we don't go through that again. Coming up, Donald Trump, as our panel stays with us, talking right now in Tucson. They're back on the trail and back in the swing states following this week's debate. That's a live view for our viewers on Bloomberg TV. Our political panel has more next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Tax deduction to start up small businesses. Because, not everybody started out with $40 $400 million on a silver platter and then file for bankruptcy 6 times.
Kamala Harris on the campaign trail in North Carolina earlier this afternoon, echoing her barb against Donald Trump from the debate earlier this week. 6 times. This stop comes in the midst of a swing state travel blitz for both campaigns here. North Carolina for Kamala Harris, Arizona for Donald Trump. And our panel is back with us right now, Lester Munson and Kristen Hahn. Not a shocker to see where they are here. Kristen, you can add Tim Walz in Grand Rapids today, Doug Emhoff in Arizona. This is going to be the travel schedule, I presume, for the next 8 weeks.
It will, and I think that we're blessed with a number of surrogates all across the country in a lot of swing states, not just the people on the ticket and their spouses. So yeah, I think they're going to be focusing on these 7 states, and you know, we've seen Donald Trump spending time in California and J.D. Vance spending time doing fundraisers in New York. Which is a little bit perplexing from my perspective because it's all going to come down to these 7 states.
Well, you do try to figure out the strategy there, to your point. Donald Trump will be in Las Vegas tomorrow, Nevada, swing state. But, yeah, he'll be doing a rally in Long Island next Wednesday, for instance. What do you make of that? These aren't states in play, are they? I
think Donald Trump is, in a way, part of his brain, he's happy to go anywhere where people are going to vibe to his groove or whatever it is, and he wants to have an enthusiastic audience, and that's going to be good video for him in the swing states. Even if he's not going to win Long Island or the state of New York, that video will look good for him in those places. I also think it's interesting to track some of these Senate races in swing states in Pennsylvania and Michigan. Republicans have pretty good candidates. Mike Rogers in Michigan, McCormick in Pennsylvania, who could kind of help move the ticket for Trump. So it might be a multi-dimensional chess game there.
We were talking earlier about not only the debate this week, but whether there be another. And Donald Trump today apparently says no. He went on Truth Social to say there will be no second debate with Kamala Harris. You're smiling because you're not surprised.
I wouldn't want to either if I were him. I mean, he lost, and it was ridiculous that he went into the spin room, and a little bit embarrassing, actually.
Have you ever seen that, a candidate walk into the spin room?
No, I've not.
Because he wanted to keep the debate
going. He wanted to keep the debate going, and he knew that he didn't, had lost the debate. And, it was his one chance to say, and this talking point that, Kamala wants to debate again because she wants another shot at this doesn't pass muster.
Okay. He actually is speaking right now in Tucson, as I mentioned. We'll put an ear on that in a second. Did you think there would be another debate? If he was your candidate, would you send him back in the ring?
Joe, I will predict right here, right now, that his refusal to have another debate will flip.
Means there is a
debate. He will decide later that it is important to have another debate, and really? I suspect we're going to have another one or two debates.
You think there's another face-off?
I think I think you're right. He got creamed in the first debate. She pushed every single one of his buttons, and he seemed defenseless in the face of her attack. He's going to want to get back out there and do it again, but he's going to want to reset the context such that it looks like he's the one driving the decision to have the debate, not because he lost to her, but because it's for some other reason. So once he can figure out how to recontextualize this, I think he's going to be all in on another debate.
He's talking about it right now, I guess. Can we hear that Donald Trump in Tucson, Arizona, reminiscing about Tuesday night?
Kamala Harris showed up spewing empty rhetoric, the same old lies, meaningless platitudes, offering no plans, no policies, and no details whatsoever. Nothing.
Okay, so it sounds like somebody who wants to go again?
I mean, maybe he will. You never know.
Does it depend on how the vice presidential debate goes? Because we do have that set for October 1st.
I don't think it necessarily depends on it. And Donald Trump is so unpredictable, and it's not like he's listening to his staff
either. So what does it come down to? The polls?
I think it probably comes down to
October that motivates him?
The polls and his feelings. I think you're probably right. I mean, he can't let this stand. If he does decide, it will be because he did get creamed. He knows it. You can tell that he knows it when he's talking, even when he's saying he doesn't, or he thinks that he won. So, it'll be one of these. And maybe he thinks he can be more disciplined. I just don't have any, confidence that man can be disciplined at all. I think she was so good at pressing his buttons and it didn't take much effort.
It's really interesting. We spent so much time talking about Joe Biden's performance in the last debate. After all, he dropped out of the race. In our 30 seconds remaining, did we just spend too little time looking at Donald Trump? Did he actually perform worse in the second than he did the first?
He didn't do that great in the first. I think he thought he defeated Joe Biden. In reality, Joe Biden defeated himself. I mean, his true condition, I think, was revealed in that debate. I don't think Donald Trump had much to do with it, but he did kind of step back and let him fail. Yeah. And to that extent, he did show discipline.
There's a second debate. Remember this conversation with Lester Munson, of course. She is Kristen Hahn, and a great panel. Thank you both for the insights. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.